There's a moment in every marriage that nobody talks about. The moment when you look at the person sleeping next to you and realize you are staring at a stranger. Not because they changed, but because the person you married never existed in the first place. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this brutal truth centuries before modern psychology caught up. Marriage doesn't transform lovers into strangers. It simply reveals what was always hidden beneath the chemical fog of infatuation. Every husband becomes a stranger not despite the marriage, but because of it. And here's what makes this realization so devastating. You signed a lifetime contract with someone you never actually knew. The wedding photos show two people in love, but Schopenhauer saw deeper. He saw two biological machines responding to evolutionary programming. Two strangers performing a script written by their DNA. Two individuals about to discover that the person they thought they married was largely a projection of their own neurochemistry. This isn't about failed marriages or bad choices. This is about the fundamental deception built into the institution itself. Society tells you that marriage deepens intimacy and creates lasting connection. But Schopenhauer revealed the opposite truth. Marriage is the process by which two people become progressively more unknown to each other while being legally bound to pretend otherwise. The man who proposes isn't thinking clearly. He's drugged, flooded with dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin, a cocktail of chemicals designed to override rational thought and drive reproduction. His brain is literally altered, incapable of seeing red flags, blind to incompatibilities, convinced that this feeling will last forever. But Schopenhauer knew what happens next. The chemicals normalize. The fog lifts. And suddenly you're living with someone whose habits irritate you, whose values differ from yours, whose dreams conflict with yours, whose very presence feels like an invasion of the space you need to be yourself. The stranger isn't who they became. The stranger is who they always were. You were just too intoxicated to notice. Every morning you wake up next to this person. Every evening you return to them. Every decision must account for them. And slowly, imperceptibly, you realize you're sharing your life with someone you don't actually know. Someone whose inner world remains foreign to you. Someone whose thoughts, when you really listen, surprise you with their unfamiliarity. By the way, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. I'm curious to see how many men around the world are finally seeing through this illusion. Now, here's where Schopenhauer's insight becomes surgical. He understood that knowing someone requires stability, but marriage creates constant change. The woman who seemed so compatible during courtship is responding to courtship chemicals. She's performing courtship behaviors. She's presenting her courtship self. But courtship is temporary. It's evolutionary theater designed to secure commitment. Once commitment is secured through marriage, the performance ends. Not because she's deceptive, but because the biological imperative that shaped her behavior has been satisfied. Her authentic self emerges. Her real priorities surface. Her actual personality, no longer mediated by attraction chemicals, reveals itself. And the husband looks at this emerging stranger and thinks, something went wrong. But nothing went wrong. This is exactly what Schopenhauer predicted. Marriage doesn't reveal your soulmate. It reveals that soulmates are myths invented to sell you on biological programming. You're not looking at who your wife became. You're looking at who she always was, minus the neurochemical filter that made her seem like your perfect match. The tragedy isn't that she changed. The tragedy is that you married a hallucination and now have to live with the reality. Every husband experiences this moment differently, but the pattern is universal. The inside jokes stop being funny. The conversations become predictable. The mystery that made her fascinating evaporates into routine familiarity. You know her schedule, her opinions, her reactions, but you don't know her. Because knowing someone requires understanding their inner experience. And marriage provides endless information about external behaviors, while creating almost no access to internal reality. You see what she does, but you don't understand why. You hear what she says, but you don't grasp what she means. You share a bed, a home, a life, but you occupy separate universes of subjective experience that can never truly intersect. Schopenhauer called this the fundamental isolation of consciousness. Each person is trapped in their own perceptual bubble, experiencing reality through their unique nervous system, interpreting events through their distinct psychological framework. True intimacy, true knowing, is impossible. We are all strangers to each other, separated by the unbridgeable gap between your experience and mine. But marriage demands the pretense of knowing. You're supposed to understand your spouse, to predict their needs, to read their moods, to finish their sentences. Society judges marriages by how well spouses perform this illusion of mutual understanding. But it's always an illusion, always a performance, always a guess based on patterns, rather than genuine access to another person's consciousness. And here's what makes this unbearable. The longer you're married, the more you're expected to know your spouse, but the less you actually understand them. Because people change, experiences reshape them, time alters their values, disappointments harden their hearts, dreams die and new ones emerge. The person you married at 25 is not the person you're living with at 35. But marriage creates the fiction of stability. You're bound to someone in constant flux while pretending they're the same person you once knew. Watch what happens in long marriages. Couples develop elaborate systems of misunderstanding. He thinks he knows why she's upset, but he's wrong. She thinks she understands his silence, but she's projecting. They've created mutual mythologies, stories they tell themselves about who the other person is. But these stories bear less and less resemblance to reality as years pass. The husband becomes a stranger not because he's unknowable, but because his wife stopped actually looking at who he is. She's looking at who she needs him to be, who she remembers him being, who she's constructed him to be in her mental model of their marriage. And he's doing the same to her. Two strangers living parallel lives while maintaining the fiction of intimate partnership. Schopenhauer saw this everywhere he looked. Married couples who'd spent decades together, but couldn't accurately describe each other's inner lives. Spouses who claimed deep connection but demonstrated profound ignorance of their partner's actual thoughts and feelings. People who swore they knew each other completely, but were constantly surprised, disappointed, confused by their partner's choices. This isn't failure. This is the inevitable outcome of trying to know another consciousness. Your thoughts are yours alone. Your feelings are private experiences. Your perceptions are filtered through your unique psychology. No amount of time spent together changes this fundamental isolation. Marriage just makes it more painful because you're legally and socially obligated to pretend the isolation doesn't exist. Here's what Schopenhauer understood that most people don't. The stranger you're married to isn't just your spouse. It's also you. Marriage doesn't just prevent you from knowing your partner. It prevents you from knowing yourself. Because authentic self-knowledge requires solitude, space, freedom from the constant need to accommodate another person's presence. But marriage demands perpetual compromise. Every decision filtered through someone else's needs. Every desire moderated by someone else's preferences. Every aspect of yourself negotiated to maintain domestic peace. You can't know who you are when who you are is constantly being shaped by someone else's expectations. You can't discover your authentic self when your self is always performing for an audience of one. You can't develop your genuine identity when your identity is half of a couple rather than a complete individual. The husband who becomes a stranger to his wife has also become a stranger to himself. He's spent years suppressing aspects of his personality that created conflict, abandoning interests that his spouse didn't share, moderating his opinions to avoid arguments, editing his dreams to fit the marriage's constraints. The man who emerges after years of marriage isn't who he was or who he could have been. He's a compromise, a negotiated settlement between his authentic self and the demands of partnership. a stranger even to his own reflection because he's lost touch with who he actually is beneath the accommodations. Schopenhauer lived this truth. He remained unmarried, maintained his solitude, preserved his authenticity. And in that preservation, he created philosophy that revealed uncomfortable truths about human nature. He could see what married men could not, because his perception was constantly filtered through the need to maintain domestic harmony. He could think thoughts that challenged everything because he didn't have to worry about how those thoughts would affect a spouse's feelings. He could be completely himself because himself wasn't contingent on someone else's approval. This is why every husband becomes a stranger, not just to his wife but to himself. Marriage creates a hall of mirrors where everyone is looking at reflections, projections, distortions. Nobody is seeing reality. Nobody is known. Nobody is knowing. Just strangers performing the ritual of intimacy while experiencing the isolation that Schopenhauer recognized as the fundamental human condition. But society sells a different story. The anniversary posts on social media celebrating decades together. The elderly couples holding hands. The cultural mythology that time deepens marital bonds and creates soul-level knowing. Schopenhauer would have seen through this instantly. Those couples aren't deeply connected. They're deeply habituated. They've learned each other's patterns. They've memorized each other's routines. They can predict each other's responses. But prediction isn't knowing. Habit isn't intimacy. Familiarity isn't understanding. You can spend 50 years with someone and still be surprised by what emerges from their mouth when they're dying. Still be shocked by what you discover in their private journals. Still realize you had no idea what they were actually thinking all those years. The strangeness doesn't decrease with time. It increases, because the longer you're together, the more each person changes in ways the other doesn't track. The more life experience creates different perspectives. The more accumulated resentments and unspoken disappointments shape separate inner worlds. You're married to a stranger not because you haven't spent enough time together, but because time itself transforms people into versions of themselves their spouse never agreed to marry. Here's the most unsettling part of Schopenhauer's analysis. Even if perfect knowledge were possible, it would destroy attraction. Mystery is essential to desire. The unknown is what makes another person interesting. The gaps in understanding are what create space for fascination. Marriage eliminates mystery through enforced proximity. You see everything. The morning breath, the bathroom habits, the private irritations, the petty resentments, the small cruelties, the boring routines, the disappointing limitations. Everything that distance and infrequency once obscured is now unavoidable. The stranger you married had the advantage of mystery. The person you're living with has the disadvantage of total visibility. And in that visibility, desire dies. Not because they've changed, but because knowing someone completely reveals they're just another flawed human, rather than the idealized figure your imagination created during courtship. Schopenhauer understood that we fall in love with ideas, not people. We project our desires onto another person and fall in love with our projection. Marriage is the long process of watching that projection dissolve until you're left with reality. And reality is always a stranger because it never matches the fantasy you married. Watch couples who've been together for decades, the way they talk to each other, the dismissiveness, the interruptions, the assumption they already know what the other is going to say. They're not communicating. They're performing a script they've run 10,000 times. The real person, the stranger underneath the script, has been abandoned. Neither person is actually present. They're both playing the role of long-married spouse while their authentic selves atrophy from neglect. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he said marriage is a form of death. Not physical death, but the death of individual consciousness. The death of authentic self-expression. The death of the possibility of being fully known or fully knowing another. You're buried alive in domesticity while the stranger you could have been, the stranger you're living with, and the stranger you've become all coexist in the same house, invisible to each other. Men feel this acutely but rarely admit it. The profound loneliness of marriage, the isolation of sleeping next to someone who fundamentally doesn't understand you, the exhaustion of maintaining the performance of intimacy when you feel like a stranger in your own life. But admitting this feels like failure. Society says successful marriages are deeply connected. Your isolation must mean you're doing something wrong. You're not romantic enough, not communicative enough, not emotionally available enough. But Schopenhauer would tell you different. Your isolation isn't personal failure, it's accurate perception. You're supposed to feel like strangers because you are strangers. Consciousness is isolating. Individual experience is private. True knowing is impossible. Marriage doesn't solve this problem. It just makes you feel guilty for experiencing what's actually true. The happiness of married people is built on lies. The lie that they know each other. The lie that their bond is special. The lie that their connection transcends the fundamental isolation of human consciousness. Schopenhauer stripped away these comforting fictions and revealed the uncomfortable truth. You're alone. Your spouse is alone. You're both alone together, performing connection while experiencing separation. And the longer you perform, the more exhausting it becomes. The stranger in your bed isn't a problem to solve. It's reality to accept. But acceptance means admitting that marriage promised something it can never deliver. The dissolution of separateness, the merging of souls, the end of loneliness through perfect companionship. These were always illusions, beautiful lies that sold you on a contract that can't be fulfilled. And now you're bound to someone who exists outside your ability to truly know them, while they exist outside your ability to truly know yourself, because the marriage has consumed the solitude required for self-knowledge. Schopenhauer chose differently. He chose the stranger he could actually know himself. He chose the solitude that permits authentic self-discovery. He chose the freedom that allows consciousness to explore itself without the constant interference of another person's needs, moods, expectations, judgments. And in that choice, he found something marriage can never provide. Not the illusion of knowing, but the acceptance of not knowing. Not the performance of intimacy, but the honesty of isolation. Not the comfort of lies, but the clarity of uncomfortable truth. Every husband becomes a stranger, because that's what humans are to each other. Strangers briefly united by chemicals, separated by consciousness, bound by contracts that try to make permanent what nature intended to be temporary. The man who understands this stops trying to solve the unsolvable, stops trying to know the unknowable, stops trying to merge with someone when merging is impossible. He accepts the strangeness, his own, his spouse's, the strangeness of existence itself. And in that acceptance, he stops demanding what marriage cannot provide. The end of isolation, the achievement of perfect understanding, the completion of self through another. These were always fantasies. Marriage is the institution where fantasies go to die, and strangers go to pretend they're not strangers while slowly becoming strangers even to themselves. Schopenhauer saw this clearly because he stood outside it. He watched from solitude. He analyzed from distance. He understood from separation. And what he understood was this. The married man looks in the mirror and sees a stranger because he is a stranger. To his wife, to himself, to the man he could have been if he'd chosen solitude over companionship, authenticity over approval, difficult truth over comfortable lies. The wisest choice isn't finding someone who knows you. It's accepting that being known is impossible. The bravest choice isn't committing to someone forever. It's refusing to make promises that biology ensures you cannot keep. The most honest choice isn't marriage. It's admitting that you're a stranger to yourself, let alone to someone else, and that embracing this strangeness might be the only authentic path available. Every husband becomes a stranger not because marriage fails, but because marriage reveals what was always true. We are all strangers, to each other, to ourselves, to the lives we're living. Marriage just makes this truth unbearable by promising the opposite while delivering exactly what Schopenhauer predicted. Isolation, wrapped in proximity. Loneliness disguised as partnership. Strangeness performing as intimacy. Until one morning you wake up, look at the person next to you, and finally see what was always there. A stranger. Not because anything went wrong, but because this is what marriage is. This is what it's always been. This is what Schopenhauer tried to tell us before we signed the contract, made the promises, bound ourselves to someone we never actually knew, and can never actually know because knowing requires what marriage systematically destroys. Distance, mystery, solitude, the space required to see clearly, the freedom required to be honest, the courage required to admit that the emperor has no clothes, and the stranger in your bed is exactly what you should have expected, because marriage doesn't create intimacy. It creates the obligation to pretend intimacy exists, while experiencing the isolation that consciousness makes inevitable. Schopenhauer lived free. He died having never become a stranger to himself. He never woke up confused about who he was or how he got there. He never looked in the mirror and saw someone he didn't recognize. He never felt trapped in a life that didn't match the life he imagined. That's not loneliness. That's liberation. That's not isolation. That's authenticity. That's not failure. That's the clarity that comes from refusing the lies everyone else accepts. The lies that keep them bound to strangers while becoming strangers to themselves. If this resonates with you, drop in the comments right now. I see through the illusion. I want to know how many men are finally waking up to what Schopenhauer understood centuries ago. That clarity deserves recognition. Your courage to question what everyone else accepts without thinking deserves acknowledgement. You're not alone in seeing the truth, even though the truth is about being fundamentally alone. Now, take one more step. Subscribe to this channel because you're not going to find this kind of uncomfortable honesty anywhere else. Click that subscribe button, hit the like. These algorithms need to know that truth still matters to some people, even when truth destroys the comfortable lies we've been sold. Every subscription tells YouTube that content like this matters. Every like pushes back against the conventional wisdom that's keeping men trapped in situations Schopenhauer predicted would make them strangers to themselves. And here's what's coming next. We're going even deeper. The next video exposes something about male psychology and modern relationships that will make this conversation look tame. Something society has completely inverted. Something that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Something that will change how you understand every interaction you've ever had. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet, but if this video challenged you, the next one will absolutely shatter some assumptions you didn't even know you had. You'll want to be here for it. Don't miss it.